I'd like to just redefine the way we talk about seeking with the inside out path is treated as just another form of suffering that we inquire into, the seeking being driven by the trauma and repression. First of all, we would want to do somatic testing. That's part of the inside out path. And the reason I'm suggesting somatic testing is because otherwise you might not know where all the forms of suffering are coming from. Because where the suffering is coming from is unconscious, repression and trauma. So we discovered that some of us at the end of the path as we embody awareness. But that doesn't help us in the beginning of the path when all these forms of suffering are arising, but we can't see the root of it. So as we do somatic testing, we see the root of the various forms of suffering so that we can bring not just inquiry to those forms of suffering, but repression and trauma inquiry, because repression and trauma is the root. There's the inside out path in a nutshell. I gave it to you in 1 minute. Proof that I don't need an hour to expound upon something. Okay, seeking. What I used to do as a teacher, like so many teachers, is I would disconnect. I wouldn't connect the investigation around seeking adequately enough to the body. Part of my bypass is that as I was seeking awakening, I would just sit there and watch a thought that said, like, you haven't discovered oneness yet. And that thought would have energy with it. And I didn't understand where the energy was coming from. And it's not just, there's some just energy of desire to be free energy. But what I realize now is that that's also repression and trauma. I don't want to feel something driving the seeking. So instead of understanding that trauma and repression was driving it at the body level, like so many people, I just deal with it at the level of, or I dealt with it at the level of witnessing mostly. And I actually suggested that to people. And I want to suggest it, but I'm going to give you a caveat. Here's the suggestion. Well, no, I'm not even going to make it a suggestion. I'm just going to tell you what I used to say to people. When you see a thought that comes up that says you're not there yet, or you have to seek this or that, you just watch it and allow it. And see that you're the awareness that remains and that you can't seek what you are. You can't seek what's already looking. And you just stay with that. That's what I would have said. Just stay with that seeing. Now, I can't say that today. And here's why. Because you can put the seeking to rest that way. I did. But you can't really put the repression and trauma driving it to rest that way. Because it's not coming into awareness for you to investigate in that moment. All you're seeing is a story, which is like the effect of that. How do we know that the energy of seeking is coming from repression? Because it's unconscious. We have to find it through somatic testing first. So why don't we just do a little bit now? Pull up whatever you're seeking and make it, like, really visualize it. Like, I want that and I'm not there yet. And you might even say, like, a reverse inquiry to conjure that energy up that seeks for that. So you could say, I don't even want enlightenment. I don't want freedom. I'm not interested in healing. And then because of that reverse inquiry, the nervous system is like, you see that? Yeah, you do. What is that? That energy. Okay, but you feel it. That's the point. Now, that energy of seeking that we feel here, can we do a boomerang? So here's the thing that you're seeking. The fact that you're not there yet, what does that mean about who you are? What's the identity behind the seeking? The deficiency story, actually. Is it, I'm not good enough, I'm not there yet, I'm a failure, I'm something? And can you see how the energy of seeking and that story go together? It feels like the energy, I have to seek this, that energy, and the story, I'm not good enough, seem like to go together like that. They do, because it's all trauma and repression. Now go back to your VIPs and this deficiency story that you discovered, reverse it. So if it's I'm unlovable, bring your VIPs, mom up, dad up, feel into the body. say the opposite. I'm totally lovable, or I am good enough. Say it several times until you can feel if there's this energy that wants to prove that you're deficient. It's like your body's disagreeing. You're unlovable or whatever. Feel that. That's like the engine of the seeking, right? But what is it? So here, go into your primary. And if you don't know what your primary is, just stop here. If your primary involves anger, with this energy of deficiency story up, say, I'm not angry at them. Say it several times and witness what comes up. And then if it's hurt or sadness as your primary, I'm not hurt by them. And remember, if hurt is your primary, you won't necessarily feel hurt here. It'll be more like contraction or frozen emotion. And if you repress anger, you're not likely to feel anger here. It's going to be repressed. So instead, you're going to want to look for something in your body that says, I'm angry. But you wouldn't necessarily be anger, contraction, or I'm hurt. Now stop. So we're not processing that right now. This is somatic testing. So let's recap what we learned there. We learned that seeking is there. We learned that the identity behind the seeking is some version of a childhood deficiency story. I'm not good enough, let's say. What we already know is that we had to develop that identity as a child to survive because we couldn't feel and express certain aspects of ourselves. So when we go back to the VIPs, we discover, okay, here's this identity. Just like it's in the seeking, it's there with my VIPs because it started there. And then we find the repression of emotion right with it because the repression and the other trauma energy is driving the seeking here now. So you can see then, if you just witness thoughts, you miss the engine. And so you can actually just witness thoughts of seeking and recognize awareness and wake up to awareness. But if you just did it that way, you wouldn't get to the drivers. This is the Scott Killaby bypass, by the way. Is not getting to trauma and repression in all forms of suffering. So like so many people with the seeking form of suffering, I did what a good seeker does, being a good seeker and following the teacher's advice. When those thoughts come up, and even if there's energy with them, just let that be. See that you're the awareness. But I couldn't get to the repression driving it because that energy of anger or whatever that is wasn't arising. It was a contraction that wasn't really moving much as I witnessed some of these thoughts of seeking. So the contraction stayed to some degree, well, to a great degree, but the seeking and the mind quieted as I witnessed these thoughts of whatever they were. So there was a recognition of presence, but then this unconsciousness was still there, hidden. This is the caveat right here, because I don't think I'm alone. I think it's really easy to do that, is to sort of cut the weeds off at the top but not get to the root. So how does that manifest? Because now you've put the seeking to rest, which can be very peaceful. And by the way, anger repressors like the peace. Be careful. And so that further buries the anger if you're an anger repressor. But there's a bigger issue, which is now that the seeking has been put to rest, there can be a false confidence like I'm done or something like that, so that we don't dig into the repression. See, the seeking might have motivated us to look at some of that, but once the seeking is gone, it's like, why look at that? And then there's a lot of teachers saying that, don't bother. So what they're doing, though, is that's dangerous, because this stuff in the body was driving the seeking. So as the seeking comes to rest, you still have that, and then that can drive other forms of suffering. This explains to me why, through the years, people were coming to me who had recognized presence, but who had different forms of suffering. Still, they weren't seeking, in other words, an awakening. So they kind of thought of themselves as realized, but like me, there were other forms of suffering, and they weren't paying attention. They didn't know the extent to which the same trauma and repression that was driving the seeking is driving this other form of suffering, disease, chronic pain, mental health issue. Yeah, or something like that. Addiction. So my caveat is you want to do more than put the seeking to rest. Think about it. You got involved with awakening to put the seeking for awakening to rest? No. You got involved in awakening because you were suffering. And we want to get to the root of the suffering. That's why you got here. If you put the seeking to rest and you think of that's the only thing I need to do, then you haven't gone to the root of the suffering. And that's where the bypass comes in, I think, right there for us. So the seeking, we capitalize on it here in Inside Out. We capitalize on all forms of suffering. So when a form of suffering arises, it's helpful. It takes us straight to the repression and trauma. And seeking is no different. So just as you would see seeking come up there, I've just taken you back to how the repression is involved in it. If you know how to do repression work, you can now do that work as the seeking comes up. And now you're killing two birds with one stone. You're not just recognizing the presence, which is part of it, because when you do inquiry, you recognize it's all happening to presence. You recognize that, but you also get to the root of the seeking. So there's recognition in it as you see these stories come and go, but there's also the transmuting of that energy that drives the seeking. But it doesn't just drive seeking. You're transmuting the energy that might drive a disease later or chronic pain. You're getting to the root of suffering, basically, instead of just ending seeking. So remember, seeking is just one form of suffering in Inside Out. It isn't treated as special, any more special than shadows or triggers, and it leads us back to trauma and repression work because that's what's driving it. I hope this helps.